Welcome to the Running for Real podcast, where each week we bring you a conversation designed to help you create positive change in your life, community, and planet. It's a collective of conversations about running, the climate emergency, and social justice. Running for Real is for the brave, for those with courage and vulnerability. United by our love of running, we're driving momentum towards some of the really tough challenges we're facing as humanity. So come join me, Tina Muir, and let's get started. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 252 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for joining me today. If this is your first time listening, I'm excited you are here. And I'm sure if that's the case, you are a super fan of my guest today. And I'm really excited to get to show you a different side of him and a different story direction to what I think maybe you have heard in the past. Now, I am going to tell you a little more about why I decided to go in this direction in just a moment. But first, I just want to take a moment just to talk about the brand that brought us together. So both my guest, Zach Bitter, and I are both sponsored by R4R Running. We are both big fans of what R4R is doing. I have talked many a time about the wide toe boxes and why that means so much to me, the foot-shaped shoe rather than a shoe-shaped shoe. And I also love the zero drop. I love the naturalness of the shoe. And I've talked about many of my favorites over the years. And I will be putting a link in the show notes for you to go get 15% off R4R shoes if you do want to go get that. So you can go to runningforreal.com/episode 252 if you want to check that out. Now today, so I said I have Zach Bitter on the show, and Zach has been interviewed a lot. He's been on shows like Joe Rogan, to just kind of bring it back to how big Zach is and how well respected he is within the community, who has also been on endless other podcasts. And so I really wanted to make this interview different. I wanted to ask him some of the deeper questions about running these longer races, and especially on what he calls runnable ground, where it is a run that is maybe on a road or a track or a flatter surface, and just imagining doing these 100-milers and even, anything really, to be honest, beyond about a 5K on a track is just so hard for me to imagine. But to talk about those things, we also talked about just wrapping our brain around certain things that are tough. We talk about his runs on the treadmill. We talk about human performance. And it's just a really enjoyable conversation. I think even if you have listened to plenty of Zach interviews before, you're going to find something different here. And I think we're going to all learn, and even if the feats he is able to accomplish just sound superhuman and out of this world, I think there's a lot that you'll be able to take from this. So I just want to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors, and we'll be right to the episode with Zach Bitter. Thank you to Momentous for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. And I mentioned to you a few months ago that they were making some really good changes about being more sustainable, thinking about products. And I'm excited that some of their products now, and they're moving them all eventually over there, are coming in these packages that are no longer plastic containers. It's going to give you 20 servings in one package. So that's less, obviously, waste going into the trash can. And it's just great that they've been able to figure out how to get the superior quality product they have here into a more sustainable and less damaging container. Now, I've been telling you over the past few months about the various products that I'm really enjoying, including Brain Drive, which I use for focus and I use in races to help me stay concentrated and able to stay focused. They also have Elite Sleep, which is also now coming in a different container, and it is going to contain some magnetine, which is the only form of magnesium proven to cross the blood-brain barrier, which will help you with your cognitive health as well. Also has wild jujube, which is a fun word to say, wild jujube seed extract, and a little bit of melatonin. I do not have any crashes the night after having that. And you can also check out their performance creatine, which is great for strength training recovery. Now you can go to livemomentous.com and use code TINA for 20% off. I'm absolutely loving hearing that many of you are enjoying this. You can be one of many people that they work with, including Emma Coburn and Molly Seidel are just two of their athletes who use these every single day. And again, using that code TINA, you will get 20% off your order. You can join us in making it a part of your day, making you be able to live life the way that you would like to and be able to do the things you want to do in that pursuit of progress that we are all on. So go to livemomentous.com and use code TINA. Zach, thank you so much for joining me on the Running for Real podcast. I'm excited you're here.
Yeah, Tina, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my teammate. It feels weird to say that when we haven't met, but I'm excited that we're both on the ultra team together. We just recently did a bit of a fun. I don't know what you would even call it. What was it called?
I guess it was. I don't remember the name. It's kind of like a team trivia type of thing.
We did. I'm trying to remember was it remote?
It's something like that. I feel I'm kind of embarrassed because I should know because we actually did that on the sales meeting side of things at Ultra. So I actually had a little bit of a primer with that activity.
And you were in the winning group, weren't you?
What's that?
Were you in the winning group?
No, we ended up getting second. I think they backloaded the scoring at the end. So I think that last question really, really tilted the favor against us. But
well, now that I know that you were in that first call as well, that means that all three of you had already done
that true.
Experience.
Yeah, it would have been all three. So we definitely made up for our lack of a fourth teammate. But we definitely knew what was kind of coming. And it is a little tricky, that first couple of questions. Like you have to figure out, like, do I click? Do I type? Or who does it? And then you usually miss one just by kind of figuring out how to work it.
Yeah, so I can't remember the name of it. I will put a link in the show notes. I want to say it's like Remote Me or something. But for everyone listening, it's this, you have this host, and I'm assuming that person is brought in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they host like a games night for a group. And it's a really fun way, like they are essentially icebreakers, but then it didn't feel like that. And the guy was great. And so if you're looking for something to have with a big group of people who, are trying to get to know each other better, it was really fun to do. So I'll put a link in the show notes. And everyone's probably like, why are you even talking about this? But it was, I really enjoyed it. And I was on a team with your wife, Nicole. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's right. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. So you have been interviewed a lot. I'm not going to go over the primary things that people tend to focus on a lot. I will talk about some of the big accomplishments that you've had. And just now I'll mention, as far as I know, you still have the world record for the 100-mile run on the track, also the 12-hour run on the track, the 100-mile treadmill you just did recently. Are those still standing?
So a few of those actually just went down recently. We had, I had a race, I guess it was probably about, 4 weeks ago at this point in time? Just seems to go so much faster these days. Mm-hmm. 4 weeks ago, I had run the USATF 100-mile road championships, and I won that. And then the following morning, there was another event over in the UK by this organization, Centurion Running. They put on this like track event where they're just targeting 100 miles for the most part. And there's a guy over there who'd been, he's pretty solid runner. He's got a bunch of accomplishments. He's won like the Spartathlon, which is this big 153-mile road race in Greece. And he's won the World 24-hour championships. And he had been preparing for this particular event for a while. And he ended up running 11 hours, 14 minutes, and 57 seconds. So that was just about 4 minutes underneath my 100-mile world record from 2019. So it's kind of cool to see this part of the sport, because for your listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with ultra running, it's just such a wide range of stuff. You have 50Ks up to like 6-day stuff. You have multi-day projects and things, and then everything in between. And then you have the different surfaces and environments you do it in. And in North America, the last decade, the trail side has grown a ton. Yeah. The road and track has been a little slower. So we're starting to see a lot more interest kind of coming into that faster, like more controlled environment running. And I think I'm really interested in seeing someone run on a sub 11-hour 100-mile. And I think we're just, we're getting a little bit closer to that with Sorkin's 11:14 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of a fun one to follow along. It's the interesting thing too about some of these timed events and these controlled like track surface ones is you can really see race tactics and kind of race like pacing strategies a lot easier. A lot of the popular courses like Ultra Trail Mont Blanc or Western States 100, it's really hard to know if someone like negative split or positive split because the course is different in every aspect along the way. Whereas when you're on a 400-meter oval the whole time, if you ran the first half faster, the second half faster, if you sped up in this spot where your weak spots are. So it's really transparent as to kind of how your day played out.
And how does that work then? Because, when I'd imagine most of my listeners have either raced a road marathon or at least know, enough about it to know that you're told do not try and positive split, that you want a negative split. How does that work with this? Yeah, in that controlled environment. Do people negative split or like how does that?
It's actually really rare. There's a guy who that is really into the data behind this, Nick Curry, and his brother has AeroViper running, which is one of the biggest race organizations from the ultra side of things, and he dives into the data on this. He's like, there's only a couple examples of people truly negative splitting in these controlled environments, and one of them was actually my previous world record. I ran about 2 minutes faster the second 50 miles than I did the first 50 miles. And
2 minutes overall.
Yeah. So my first 50 miles was 5 hours and 40 minutes. And my second 50 miles was 5 hours and 38 minutes. So I went a little bit faster in the second half of the race than the first half of the race. But that's pretty rare. You don't typically see that. Most people, I think they get into this mindset of, I need to kind of bank some time when my legs are fresh, when my mind is fresh. And then if I do that, I'll be able to kind of not run quite as fast at the end and still hit my goal, which I can kind of appreciate. There's definitely, a different type of physical and mental, just like fatigue, I think, for some of these longer, lower intensity events. But I also think it's just very unexplored to try to negative split or even split. So it's really hard to get a good, clean data set out of the population that's doing these things. And if I had to guess, I would say if you're maybe like 2 to 3% on either side of an even split, that's probably going to yield your best result. And whether you're, 2 to 3% negative split or positive split, that maybe isn't going to be that big of a factor.
So how do you go about that then with, these controlled track, treadmill, road situations? Well, road, obviously there can be some hills, but, with the trails, you could say, I'm going to get to the top of this hill and then I'm going to go down, whatever. But like, do you start out one of these runs saying, well, I think I'm ready to run about this? Or like, how do you determine that with such a long race?
Yeah. The nice thing is at this point, I've done enough of them where I kind of know, well, this is what I've done in the past. If I want to make this much of an improvement, here's the splits I need to hit. So then if my training indicates that I think that's a reasonable enough goal, then what I'll end up doing is I'll kind of pick a lap split. So the nice thing about these, well, nice and sometimes it can be a problem too, is they'll have like a big computer or TV screen. So every time you do a lap, you can see what your lap split was. So when you think of 100 miles on a 400-meter track is 402 and a half laps. So you could see every one of those if you wanted to. I would advise against that, but it is nice to kind of spot check. So I'll go in thinking, well, if I want to average like this mile pace to hit this time goal, then I need to be within I'll give myself kind of like, if everything goes perfect, this is the split I'd have to hit on average. If things go good but not great, and kind of like worst case scenario, but still within the realm of what I would consider a good day, this is the slowest I can go. And usually I'll have like maybe a 3 to 4 second like buffer in there that I'm trying to hit each lap. So then as I'm coming around, in the early stages, I'll check a little more frequently just to kind of calibrate things. Once you kind of get a feel for it, then I can pretty much hit those splits on command and then just kind of spot check every once in a while to make sure I'm not drifting in and out one way or the other. And that's kind of how I've always gone about it.
I mean, that's not a big window though, 3 to 4 seconds in a 400.
No, I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, if you think about it, like 4 seconds, we're getting up to about 15 seconds per mile. So like if I went 4 seconds faster one lap the next, I'm speeding up 15 seconds a mile.
Yeah, that's true.
It's also a lot slower though too. It's not like, marathon pace, 10K pace where 15 seconds per mile is going to be you're changing systems at that point almost. Mm-hmm. Whereas, in 100 miles, I'm like if I speed up 15 seconds per mile, I'm probably still underneath my aerobic threshold, or maybe going from just under it to up to it or something like that. So I think there's probably a little more wiggle room in that if you look at it as a big window, but it is a small window when you think about it in terms of just if you start feeling a little negative or hit a low point, now all of a sudden, like, you fall 7 seconds slower than what your median goal split is. And it can be kind of hard to kind of turn things around. And that's how I describe these track events really, is the momentum can shift super quick. Like, you can shift momentum in a positive direction really fast because you can confirm it really quickly, but it can go the other way too. Like, if you do a lap and you fall out of your range on the slow side, and then you're like, oh, here it goes. And then like you do a second one. And if that kind of starts to pile up, it's really easy to kind of spiral out of control and let that kind of ruin your focus. So you kind of have to catch those things early and try to shift the mindset, shift the focus, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so impressed by, so I, as you know, I'm venturing slowly into the trails and getting longer and longer slowly. But I can wrap my brain around, obviously, I've done road marathons. I can wrap my brain around a 50K, maybe even a 50 mile on the roads. And I can wrap my brain around trail. I'm starting to do 100 miles, how that's physically possible for someone. But then the road element, you just won the 100-mile road championships, the USATF sanctioned one. And was that the term, sanctioned? USATF road championships.
Yeah.
100 mile, I should say. But the pounding for, myself, or I would imagine most people listening, just running a road marathon on your legs is insane. And I was blown away after I did my first trail marathon about how much better my legs felt that day and the next day and the next week. Like they didn't feel like someone had taken a baseball bat to them. They felt somewhat normal. So I'm just trying to wrap my brain around how does your body handle that pounding? Because it's one thing to train for 100 miles and to say, okay, I'm going to do a 50-mile run as a training run, or do a race as a training run. But that extra pounding of the cement, how do you get your body to prepare for that when, it's so hard, just the surface?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it just kind of falls partly into the specificity standpoint. So, for me, I think one of the reasons why I gravitated towards some of these harder surfaced runnable courses early on was just because I had a pretty big background in that, in terms of where I was typically training. So I translated over to that maybe a little more smoothly than, say, mountainous trails. I grew up in the Midwest, so bluffs were our biggest hill if we could get them. And that, I think, helps a little bit. I think I think there's probably some individual mechanical things too, where a particular gait is going to maybe absorb the impact a little bit differently. And if you happen to kind of have that, which may be a product of where you've trained in the past, you may just have a little bit of an easier way of that. The reason I include that one is because my wife, Nicole, who's also an ultramarathon runner, she has a vastly different experience than I do on track surfaces. And I have a vastly different experience to her on downhill stuff. So we can go out, there's this spot here not too far from our house called Mount Ord, where essentially you go about 7.5 miles up, 4,000, 5,000 feet, and then you come down. So it's about a 15-mile round trip. And, we'll do that sometimes, almost 2 times or 2 times. And the next day my quads will just be wrecked, and she'll just be like, oh, I'm just going to go out for another run the next day. And then we'll go do one of these track events, and she'll be feeling perfectly fine. Then all of a sudden she'll hit 50K or something like that, and her body just kind of falls apart on her there. And it's just two completely different results. But really what I've kind of gotten to kind of recognize, because I have trained for some of these more trail mountainous events in the past, and when I do actually put a full buildup into it, my body I do feel like I'm less beat up after some of the trail events than I am typically some of the road track type hard surface stuff. But it's in a different way too. The thing about the track in that environment is your mechanics are going to be almost identical all day long. So there's certain areas that just take a hit every step in the exact same way. Whereas when you're out on the trail, you have that variance. So those forces and the different muscle flexion and kind of stabilization stuff is going to spread out a little more uniformly. So you might just be like mildly sore all over on the trails, whereas you might be like hyper sore in like 3 or 4 spots after running on a track
yeah, that's true.
or a flat surface.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just interesting to think about. And I kind of love that people like you are venturing into blending the two, like finding a way of like, here are these really long events over trails and tough courses, but then you can also see how fast you can go over, a flat surface or controlled environment. It's going to be, as you said, really interesting to watch it develop over the coming years now that there's more and more people interested in it.
Well, and that's kind of what I find most impressive about a lot of the like pro road marathoners, especially when they have really long careers, because it's such a, like they're essentially rinsing and repeating year after year, training cycle after training cycle. And for me, I think the trails have saved me from essentially losing interest in some of this stuff because, like to take 2019, for example, at the end of 2018, I had gone through a pretty long stretch of focusing on flat runnable stuff. And I just wasn't super motivated to go through another training block like that and realistically, take an honest swing at the world record. So I'm like, I'm going to take half a year. I'm going to train for the San Diego 100, completely different course, completely different training, and just kind of put that stuff, the flat runnable stuff on the back burner for a while. And so I did that. And mid-year, I got back to doing the flat stuff again. And I remember that first phase of the training for it, I was like, I had normalized maybe a little bit of monotony, and I didn't really realize how much that was impacting my motivation and my desire to actually go out and train and race hard for that until I kind of separated myself from it for a bit and then came back and realized how exciting it was to kind of build up again and do that again and reintroduce all of it. And that's when I ended up breaking the world record that year.
Oh,
so
really?
It's kind of funny how that stuff works. I've always looked at it kind of through that lens where, perhaps I'm sacrificing a little bit of specificity by stepping away. I'm certainly probably not going to become the best trail runner over one training cycle or anything like that. But if it kind of lengthens my career, keeps the enjoyment there and makes things more interesting and fun in the training and things, I think that's probably the direction I'd want to head anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and if it keeps your head in the game, then isn't that ultimately the goal? Because if our head is not there, then our body's not going to be there, is it? So yeah, no, I definitely understand that. And as someone who did marathon after marathon, road after road after road after road, I definitely get how that can happen. I would love to ask you, you host a podcast yourself called Human Performance Outliers. You're clearly one of those yourself. But when we talk about finding that edge of human performance, what would you say is what drives that for you? What drives you to find that? Because surely at this point, it cannot be just about that moment of finish. Yes, I did it. You wouldn't be able to go through all of these things for so long for that few seconds of what is it for you then if it's not that? Or maybe it is that, but I'm assuming not.
Yeah. So I think, with the podcast, it's kind of funny because I used to co-host it. And the reason we called it Human Performance Outliers, because my co-host was, I'm not kidding, literally twice as big as me. So he was like a short, high intensity, 60-second or less athlete. And he's done things like the Highland Games, professional rugby player, bunch of strength competitions and things like that. So when we were looking at it, we were thinking performance on both sides of the spectrum versus necessarily someone who's, winning races all the time versus just having that wide variety of different athletes and different approaches. And it also kind of blended in, a lot of folks who follow me know that I don't necessarily follow the standard dietary practices that you'd think of with an endurance athlete. So that kind of is another kind of phase of it too. We were both kind of more lower carbohydrate. So, we considered ourselves not necessarily fitting within the standard protocol on that. But to answer your question, I think for me in the racing side of things, this has evolved a bit over my career. I think early on when I first was exposed to some courses that I was able to feel like I really nailed, I think chasing records and things like that was a big draw, maybe even the primary focus. But after kind of going through a few of those cycles, it became kind of clear to me that that's kind of a losing battle in terms of this, like, chasing a record. And it certainly becomes a losing battle if you're chasing a record and then trying to hold on to it, because it's inevitable it's going to get broken, right? I mean, here I am, right? A year and a half later, and it's been broken. So, like, I think the real value is finding where is that outlier performance for you as an individual. And it can be anything, right? It can be whatever you decide you want to spend your time and energy on, and find out, like, what is that absolute pinnacle of what you're capable of. So that's been a huge driver for me, especially with these kind of flat 100-mile controlled events, is, at the end of the day, when I've run my last competitive race, I really, really want to be able to say there was at least one race where I felt like everything went great. I got every last bit out of myself, and it's doubtful I will ever have been able to run faster than that and have that kind of peace of mind that, like, I put myself in a position to know where my limits were, found my own limits, and then, however the sport progresses after that, because it certainly will. I think we'll see a sub 11-hour 100-mile in the next few years. Then, you can still be kind of like, feel like you're like, it was worth it in that sort of mindset, I guess.
You said there about, looking back when you have come to the end of the peak of your career. Do you think you will ever be able to look back and find that, or, like, could that have already happened where you have had a race where, that was the edge of your what is possible, but because of the way that we as athletes always want more and always look back feeling like, I could have done this, I should have done that maybe you can't see it that way? Or do you genuinely believe that there is a lot more in there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a couple things to consider, I think, with that. One is, the way I'm maybe going to gauge it is when I cross the finish line and maybe give myself a couple days to reflect. If I think to myself, like, I don't have any more to give, then that's the time. It's time to move on. And maybe that doesn't mean no more running competitively. Maybe that just means I need to change my focus. Maybe I need to focus on something else other than 100-mile flat. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of going to be my compass, I think, in terms of, like, how much more time and energy I put into that particular event. And then it comes down to, like, did I kind of eke every last bit out of myself? I could make an argument that I did already or that I could be confident or comfortable saying that with my race in 2019. I certainly executed a really good race. I think when you're talking about races as long as 100 miles or 12 hours, there's always going to be things that pop up that weren't on the plan. That's just kind of reality of doing anything for that long a period of time. So it's more about just thinking of it like, okay, 3 or 4 things happened that I didn't expect. I responded as well as I possibly could have to them. Therefore, I can't consider that like a negative or something that I could have improved upon. Now, with that said, there's certain things that are kind of built in that we see. I mean, as you know, we're kind of in a transition period right now in running where technology is becoming a very big topic that hadn't always been there in the past, where, now we have shoes that are reporting a 2 to 8% performance benefit on top of what would typically been seen in a pair of kind of traditional running shoes. So, for me in 2019, when I ran the 11:19, I was wearing a normal pair of shoes. So I haven't done a super controlled track ultramarathon in a pair of the new technology yet. So for me, it's like, how much further do I go just with a different pair of shoes, changing nothing else about the day, the pace and the intensity and all that stuff. So that keeps me interested. The other thing is just like these controlled environments are very controlled, but they're not necessarily as controlled as they could be. So 100 miles on a track is not necessarily something that gets like put up as an exclusive event. A lot of times what happens is it'll be like a 24-hour event, a 48-hour event, or sometimes even a 6-day event, like in the case that I did at the Pettit Center in 2019, where you have folks who are seeing how far they can run in these time frames. And as you can imagine, if I go there to try to run 100 miles under 12 hours, and there's people out there who are trying to evenly pace themselves for a 48-hour event, they're just going to have to be going slower. So as track protocol goes, the passer goes to the outside lane. You get 20, 30, sometimes 40 people on a track. You probably average lane 2 the whole way, basically. There is, and then you're going to have some of that. Like I think most like road courses, what do they say? Like give yourself a 1% bump in distance just from tangents. So there's a little of that kind of baked into the system in general. When you get in the track world, maybe not so much because people are going to be a little more specific about trying to hug lane one when they can. And unless it's like a finishing kick, they're probably not, or they need to pass someone, they're not going to move to the outside on a turn. But that's another thing too, where I think these guys at the Centurion running group that we were talking about just earlier are starting to kind of push a little bit more that way. It's like, let's get some 100-mile track events where we're just doing the 100-mile. So the athletes can stay in lane one the whole way. And let's see, like when we eliminate all of the potential hurdles, how fast can someone go? So I think we'll start to see some of that shift as well.
Thank you to Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. I just love summer running in Tracksmith clothing. I actually was I had John Glazer, who's a comedian and an actor, on an Instagram live with me a few weeks ago. And I was asking him about Tracksmith. Have you tried it? And he said to me, no, I've seen it. I haven't tried it. And then he said, what is so special about this brand anyway? And as much as I could give him, tell him about the quality, tell him about how good it feels, tell him about the fact that I can wear things 2 days in a row and them not stink. At the end of the day with Tracksmith, you just have to try it. You just have to wear it. I don't know anyone who has tried on their clothes and not absolutely loved them. I am such a big fan. They're constantly innovating, constantly changing things, and the colors are just beautiful. They've got some new colors out now in colors like straw, rosewood, there's spruce, mauve, and then there's the navy, black, and ivory that they often have. So I'm really loving the Twilight series. That's perfect for this time of year. It's really comfortable. It dries quickly. It's lightweight, and it's just really good for summer running. And I like wearing it just on a day-to-day basis as well. One thing I love that I should mention, when you go to the Tracksmith website, you will see people running in their clothes, but you actually see like a sweat pile, or you might see like some drips coming off them, or you might see them with a slightly red face, because they film not models and they don't take picture of models, but they take pictures of actual people actually running. So you know that these are comfortable, even beyond me saying it. You know that these are quality. And they're just awesome clothes. So some of my favorites are the session shorts. As I mentioned, I really like the Twilight series. I just like all of their tanks if you are a woman. But I also have got Steve quite a few things. And he has been testing out some of the session shorts, the longer ones. And those are really, he quite likes those as someone who has been very picky and very particular about his shorts. He's not a short guy. But those session shorts are 7-inch. And if you want even longer ones, there are some Longfellow shorts, which are also going to be great for running, but you can also wear them for day-to-day, like casual wear. Tracksmith, you can go to tracksmith.com and use code TINA15 for $15 off your order of $75 or more. Be sure to go check out their journal while you are there. They have some lookbooks, they have films, they have stories, all kinds of interesting stuff to read and learn. You can also learn about the programs that they are up to and how they are supporting people within various fields within the running world. Thank you to Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode. Go to tracksmith.com and use code TINA15 for $15 off your purchase of $75 or more.
But that's another thing too, where I think these guys at the Centurion running group that we were talking about just earlier are starting to kind of push a little bit more that way. It's like, let's get some 100-mile track events where we're just doing the 100-mile. So the athletes can stay in lane one the whole way. And let's see, like when we eliminate all of the potential hurdles, how fast can someone go? So I think we'll start to see some of that shift as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Although I do find it funny that the you're saying about the the Centurion doing it in England, and England's weather is just wildly unpredictable. So that kind of makes me laugh, because I'm like, I can't see. I mean, I guess the temperature wise is probably good for the most part, but the rest of it is just a bit of a wild card. And that surprised me over here when I first came here, that people could say, oh, on Friday it's going to be sunny, and I'd be like, how do you know that?
Yeah.
It's Monday. And then it was, because in England, it's just, you
never
don't really
know.
trust the weather.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, I'm all for it. That's cool to hear. And, you know, going back to why you do it and finding, finding the limit, finding the appreciation for what you're doing. We hear people talking, and people like you or other professional athletes, maybe even myself, someone might hear saying, finding joy in the moment, appreciating the challenge, they're enjoying the process of that discomfort. What do you mean by that when you say that? Like, how, for someone listening who's thinking, how can I possibly be saying I'm enjoying the fact that my body is screaming at me, stop.
Yeah.
My mind is screaming at me, stop. Like, what do you take that to mean?
Yeah, I like this topic because I think it's just really interesting, and it highlights just the way I kind of think our minds oftentimes work, where, you have these, like, and it makes sense. You have these acute physical, emotional, and mental reactions that are very easy to remember. This is how I compare it to when I grew up in the Midwest. We'd have all 4 seasons, and the winters could get pretty brutal. I mean, we'd have some days where this was super rare, but sometimes even like 50 below zero wind chill. And you have a winter and you get through the back end of it. And the next time it comes around, you start thinking about how bad winter can be, especially if you're someone who's training outside. And you always remember like the 10 worst days from the previous winter, and your mind thinks that's the entire winter process. But in reality, the majority of the winter days were like 20 to 30 degrees, sometimes sunny, sometimes calm, which were just really great times to run. You just put on some long sleeves, some pants, and it's actually kind of pleasant. You don't have to worry as much about hydration and just go out there and cruise. But you're not going to remember those days, because those days were ones that were comfortable. Those days were ones that, you wanted to go out there. And I kind of think it's the same thing. It's like, I can think of just, rock bottom points in any of my races. And if I look at that as like something that is the driver of the sport, then I think I would probably have quit a long time ago. But when I think about it through the lens of, I have this opportunity to kind of start from a beginning and build something that ultimately I get a test on a day. And yeah, that test is going to require me to go through a lot of physical, mental, emotional discomfort, but there's an answer at the end of that. And that answer is going to be, did I do the right training here? What can I change here? And what can I do differently to improve that? And it kind of becomes more of a puzzle, more of a game, more of a problem solving thing than it does this, how do I get over this like state of discomfort? And I think once I started looking at it like that, it became a lot more motivating. I think it probably will increase the longevity of my career if I can kind of stay in that mindset, or if that mindset stays interesting to me, I guess I should say. But that's kind of how I've looked at that so far. And I guess like the easy way to maybe say it is, it's kind of like that type 2 fun thing, right? It's like you got to get through the hard part to get the satisfaction at the end.
Yeah. What is your personal critic or voice say to you? What is it or does it change? Is there a certain thing that when you're in a struggling moment that you're, that little, nasty gremlin that we have in all of us tells you? Yeah. And what do you say back?
It's usually some shape or form of, why did you spend 20 hours a week preparing for this? I think that's always my biggest one I've got to try to, work around is, I am just kind of a curious person in general. So like, I could be super entertained with a variety of different like physical pursuits, regardless of whether I'd be good at them or not. Obviously I was never going to be like, 6'5", 300-pound power lifter, no matter how hard I tried. But I could get really interested in strength and conditioning or something like that. And that would, I would find a reason to like it. I would love to do the work. I would look at it probably through the same lens I do the building of an endurance training plan. And I have a lot of fun with it. So sometimes I do find myself asking, like, since I am specializing more or less, or using this as a vehicle to my profession, like, what am I doing this instead of? And, at the end of the day, I think this is probably a product of modern society to a degree, where we just have a lot more opportunities to do different things. And, when I grew up, I was in a lot of different sports. So I've had exposure to a lot of different things too. And I think with that comes the the necessity to kind of justify what you're doing. And if things are feeling kind of crummy at the moment with your sport of choice, then it's kind of easy to think, well, maybe I should just be start doing this instead.
Yeah, I definitely understand that, and it's just interesting to hear people's responses to that question because I mean, we're all going to have tough moments, and I like to highlight the fact that people like you and other people who someone might look up to and think, oh, they must be a superhero, still struggles with those thoughts. And you've obviously become good at pushing through and getting through those tough moments. But do you ever feel that you've gone too far at any point? Is there any race or situation that you regret pushing through what that voice is trying to tell you?
That's a good question. I think, I've definitely made the mistake of thinking like, okay, I'm ready for this, and justifying in my head that I was ready for something that I just wasn't ready from. And I recognize that in hindsight. A great example of that was actually, I've got two examples of that in 2017, both of them occurred in this year. And one was, I got into the Western States 100 kind of a little bit last minute, not super late in the game, but late enough where I knew I had to kind of circle the wagon, so to speak, and change my training protocol enough to be ready for a course like that versus flat runnable stuff. And I kind of just transferred my current workload, which was pretty high at that point in time, to a different environment. And by doing so, my body just wasn't ready for it. And I ended up getting pretty much my only like long-standing injury in ultra running, which was a stress fracture on my right sacroiliac, which is essentially your tailbone. And I ended up having to take about 7 weeks off and didn't get to the start of the race there. So for that one, I think that was more kind of the training side, where I was like, I'm going to really put in the work. I'm going to push hard. I'm going to be dedicated to this. I'm going to be ready. And by doing so, I overreached and acquired an injury in the process. The second one was later that year when I got back into shape again after the injury. I had two races on the schedule. And, one was kind of a runnable trail. The other was an attempt at the world record for 100 miles that I thought I would be fine and ready for, and it just turned out I wasn't. But I stuck to the plan from a pacing standpoint and just blew up and ended up dropping out at like 60 miles. So those are kind of two that stick out to me as like lessons where it's like, you do want to give yourself a chance. You want to definitely believe in the process and trust yourself and, go with that on race day. But you have to also be honest with yourself when you're picking these opportunities, because there's only so many of them at the end of the day, and you don't want to necessarily squander a bunch of them either. So kind of being maybe a little more cautious about like the timelines and what I can actually get away with and not get away with is something I learned a lot of from those two experiences in 2017.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, I guess that shows that in the moment itself, the race itself, where you're having that, maybe I don't know if I can do this, or like, I'm not ready for this. The answer is always going to be keep going. Unless, like you said there, that you were going for a time. I'm just thinking for like anyone listening who is in a race situation and they are maybe going for a time. Do you regret dropping out of that race? Just, for you in terms of saving yourself for another race, but for someone listening who finds themselves in that situation on their own relative level, what would you say there?
Yeah, I'm a little on the fence on whether I think it was the right move or not. Because in one case, I can make a strong argument for each side. So here's the argument for staying in. Had I just kind of acknowledged that wasn't a world record running type of day and just digested that and paced myself accordingly, took care of myself accordingly, I could have probably run 11 hours and 50 minutes for 100 miles or something like that, which would have been, there's only been one other American who's run under 12 hours in 100 miles. So that wouldn't be a bad stat to have on my resume to have, another sub 12 hour 100 mile there. But I was so focused on world record or bust that, once that goal fell off the table, there was nothing left. So once, when you're in those situations where you're staring down 40 miserable miles and you're not out there for any reason, it just gets a lot easier to fold, I think. So that's maybe kind of the way to look at it from like a regretful standpoint. From a positive standpoint, I think I like to look at it as like there was definitely mistakes made leading into that race, doing that race in the way I did it. And by kind of going through that process, having it play out the way it did probably shaped my mindset and my approach for some future attempts and things like that was maybe necessary for me to run 11:19. So it's just one of those kind of semi unanswerable questions where you can kind of find a way to justify either direction with it. And there's probably not a right or wrong answer. It's more of kind of how you use it, I guess, in terms of making progress in future things.
Thank you to Ultra for supporting me, supporting Zach, and for just being the shoes that I have loved for many years now. Can't imagine myself wearing other shoes with the nice wide toe box and the zero drop. I've really got used to that. I've lately been enjoying the Tauren 5, which has just been, it looks so cute. And from the men out there, there's obviously a non-cute male version if you want to have that, or whoever is listening to this and wants to have a more simple color scheme, you can also find that. But I'm really loving the color design that I have. You can see some photos of that on my social media. But the Tauren 5 has this new Ultra Ego Max midsole foam for a plush, bouncy ride with added durability, has a focused fit and feel, and it's got that well-known Ultra foot shape comfort. And this Tauren is actually the shoe that I recommend for people transitioning to Ultra for the first time. Tauren is my favorite shoe to suggest for new Ultra users. And then also, I am still wearing it myself. I wear the Tauren multiple times per week. It's one of my favorite shoes. It might actually be my favorite road running shoe. So you can find out more at ultrarunning.com. And in the show notes for this episode, I will actually put a link to get 15% off your order at ultrarunning.com. So be sure to go check out the show notes for this episode. And yeah, thank you to Ultra for supporting myself and Zach.
From a positive standpoint, I think I like to look at it as like there was definitely mistakes made leading into that race, doing that race in the way I did it. And by kind of going through that process, having it play out the way it did probably shaped my mindset and my approach for some future attempts and things like that was maybe necessary for me to run 11:19. So it's just one of those kind of semi unanswerable questions where you can kind of find a way to justify either direction with it. And there's probably not a right or wrong answer. It's more of kind of how you use it, I guess, in terms of making progress in future things.
Yeah, I often think about this when people ask about would you change things from, would you go back and change it? And I, along the lines of what you were just saying there, I don't really believe in changing anything because there's something that came out of that lesson, and you clearly have learned from that situation. You wouldn't have brought it up otherwise.
Yeah.
Where we may not see initially why that happened, but then afterwards it all comes together and it makes sense. So
yeah, one thing I'd be interested about your perspective is because when I'm coaching folks for ultra marathons, and I try to do this at least to a degree, there's circumstances where I won't, but it's pretty rare now, where I'll go into a race and I'll have here's my A goal, and this is what I really want to do. And then I'll give myself a B goal or a C goal, and that's going to be the motivation to kind of finish a race. Or if things fall off the A goal, I still have a reason to be out there. And especially when I'm working with someone who's new to the sport, who I feel like they just really need to get the experience, regardless of whether it's just gutting out a finish or, hitting their top target, it's still going to bring a lot of value for them to have those multiple goals. But for you, when you were running professionally, it's just especially marathon and below, there's such a tight margin for error. How do you navigate that for a race where if you're 3 seconds per mile slower at mile 18 than you need to be, it's kind of, how do you kind of approach that? Do you go in with just one, I'm going to do this or nothing? Or is it kind of the same way, just scaled down at a higher intensity?
I mean, firstly, I think I actually am not the right person to ask because I was very much one of those people. I looked at my watch in a marathon. I would look at 1 mile, 10K, done. Like I didn't look again. So I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask because I was and still am a very much by feel person. Like, and with that trail race, I think the first time I looked at my watch was like 3 hours and 45 minutes.
Okay.
Like I really don't look at my watch. But that said, I think with road marathons and below, it's having. I think I always say that the goal is always just to finish because so many things go wrong and it is tough. I should say before I go into this anymore that I think when you're running at the competitive level, I've realized this now, like as I stepped back from it, and you may feel the same thing here, and it relates to your answer of like, should you have dropped out there? At that top level, I think there is a lot more dropping out, and it's because you are saying, okay, well, like for me in a road marathon, I didn't actually ever drop out of a marathon, but like if things were just totally falling apart and I was at mile 21 or I was at mile 18 and I knew there was another race in a month's time, I would just I never actually had that because my marathons all mostly went well other than the first one. You would maybe say, okay, let's just cut it and then we'll try again. Mm-hmm. But I've realized talking to, everyday recreational runners that isn't, they're not going to say like, oh, let's just cut this and I'll shuffle some things around and do a race in a month. You just got to go through it. Mm-hmm. So I do think, especially for newer runners or runners who are doing this as a hobby, it is always going to be best for them to just gut it out and figure out something about who you are and discover you're stronger than you think. But I do tell people to have an eight, or I call it a stars aligned goal, which is you cross the finish line, like looking down at your watch or like, oh my God, like, did that just happen? Like, I can't even like understand how that possibly happened. But then, an A goal is like a personal best or a time that you think you're capable of. B would be a personal best, like any, a few seconds or anything. And then C is a finish. Because I do think people work from like scaling it down. But then I also personally feel like if you get too into that, you then are just like, it's almost like, well, I give up on that goal.
Yeah.
And then when actually you were just in a bad patch and maybe in a few miles you would have felt good and picked it up again, which is another reason I don't like looking at the watch, because I feel like then you freak yourself out if you're going, as you said, the timing is you need it so precise, but at the same time you may have a few miles. Like I remember one of my races having a few miles where I think I walked for a few steps a few times, and my, I was 30 plus seconds slower in those miles. But then I had miles after that where I was a whole minute faster than I was. So like, I'm not sure that I like to not encourage people to worry too much about it and let their body tell them, but then that's not how most people do it. So
I mean, my wife Nicole, she doesn't wear a watch hardly ever in training, and I don't think she's ever worn one in an ultra marathon. So like, she's definitely in that same camp where she knows what it feels like to run 100 miles and the intensity that she needs to give, and having that data just, I think, promotes anxiety, promotes mental energy being spent on something that it doesn't need to be spent on. And I can totally appreciate that. And you make a great point too, where when you give yourself those goals, you have to be super mindful about whether you're giving up on the A goal for the B goal, the B goal for the C goal prematurely. I almost did that actually in 2019 at the Pettit Center when I ran 11:19. I was at around mile 40 and I had a couple laps that were out of my range. And I thought to myself, I had learned from my lesson in 2017. So I was like, I'm going to do this race. But I was thinking, maybe it's a high 11-hour finish and not a world record type of day for today. And, thankfully I had enough experience, I think, where you do push through lows and come out the other end in a positive direction, that I said, okay, I have to get back in range for at least a few laps before I make this decision this early into a race. And I did, and it spiraled in the right direction from there on forward. So that is something I think I think once you start layering goals like that, it's very helpful to have a race where you've pushed through a few really low patches and ended up exceeding your expectations or hitting your expectations, or at least coming away from it with a positive experience, so that when you're presented with those walls in a race, you don't necessarily just, give up at first sign of struggle.
Yeah. And that's why I mentioned what I did at the beginning about, I don't want to say the ease to which professional or elite athletes can drop out, but I do feel like it was, for me, in pretty much every race I had as a professional athlete, that thought of like, should I drop out, would flitter through my mind. Mm-hmm. But then when I talked to recreational runners, they were like, no, I didn't consider dropping out. Are you crazy? But like, to me, that was like something that always I can always drop out. That was always a way out. And I, very, very, I think I maybe have dropped out of like 4 or 5 races total in my life, but still, like, it was always coming through. And so I do think it's slightly different at that level, because you always have that option for other races that you can just be like, hey, can I get in your race? And that's obviously a privilege that we have, but it was always a way out that wasn't always helpful. So yeah, interesting though. I'd love to know for you, how do you keep yourself, I don't want to say your feet on the ground, but like, you are surrounded, and I've seen the camaraderie you have with the other guys on the ultra elite team, and just how close knit the ultra community is, or appears to be. How do you keep yourself grounded in terms of just with the rest of the world, be it runners or non-runners, that like what you're doing is extraordinary, and for the average American, they can't run a quarter of a mile? Like, do you remind yourself of that often? I just feel like it'd be so easy to get caught up in, I'm only running 40 miles this weekend because everyone around you is running 100, Yeah,
it's an interesting thing. I think like part of my kind of, I guess, view is, I spent the majority of my running career, I was good, but I wasn't great. So like, in high school, I could make state cross country and track my senior year on like a small school, Division 3 out of 3 divisions. And college, I could make the varsity team in track and cross country, but I wasn't going to be racing at nationals. And that was also at a Division 3 caliber. So like, I had plenty of years of just kind of like amongst the community I was with, which I appreciate is, when we're talking about collegiate athletes in general, we're kind of moving towards the top end of the talent pool or the performance pool a little bit, but that's what you're surrounded with. So you kind of get an appreciation for how good some of these other guys and gals are when you start getting to the people who are winning nationals, especially at like the Division 1 level. So like, I think when I came into the sport, it was like, I've always kind of had that experience in the back of my mind, really, where like, there's always been people better than me, and there probably always will be. And it's more of a scenario of like, what opportunities do people get to be able to even do a sport like this, and then get around to deciding whether they're going to focus on one distance or the other. So I think that's kind of helped shape it too. I think the other unique thing with ultra marathons is it is just kind of it's getting much more popular. It's certainly getting more like public attention, but there's this like certain kind of camaraderie that I think just comes in with the experience of, say running a 100-mile race or running a 50-mile race or whatever the distance may be. And there's a uniqueness to it that you kind of need to experience it to really know. So whether you're finishing in the very back or the middle or the front of a pack, there's certain experiences that everyone is going to kind of, and we've kind of talked about some of them actually. So like, I think there's like this appreciation kind of across the board for everyone. And, just because someone maybe runs 100 miles in twice as much time as it takes me, my mindset goes, they had to do that for twice as long versus like, how did they go so slow or something like that? So I think there's this connection at like a human level almost when you have those similar experiences and it. And when you're talking to that person, they can understand what you're saying, even though it's hard to really describe it. And that's kind of a unique thing, I think, that people find themselves in when they have those similarities with another person that kind of goes above and beyond, any level of success, which, is just kind of unique in the sport, I guess, too. Cause like when we think of other big sports, like, professional sports anyway, where you get like, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, it's like you could be a fan and you're not going to participate. But in ultra running, like you could be a fan of the sport and you could also toe the line at Western States with Jim Walmsley. So like, you have this unique scenario where like you're out there with him. He's going to finish ahead of you in most cases, but he's, you know what he goes through. He knows what you go through. You're both at the same event. You're both participating in the same arena, so to speak. And that's, I think, kind of unique. And that's what I think kind of makes the community the way it is.
Yeah, definitely. And I would love to just bring to the front again what you said about being out there for double the amount of time. So often the middle back of the pack people put themselves down saying, put people like you and I on a pedestal, like, wow, look what you can do. But having stepped away from, the faster side of road running. And I was saying to some friends recently that for me, a 4-hour run is the longest. 4 hours and 19 minutes was the longest I'd ever spent running by nearly 2 hours. And or at least in a race situation. And so do you think about that often, about the fact that elite athletes get put on a pedestal? And granted, you're also doing these timed runs, which everyone is out there for the same amount of time. But do you spend a lot of time thinking about the fact that, like when you've finished and you're going to bed that night because you've already had your race and eaten and had some time to reflect, and now you're going to bed and they're still out there. Do you consider that a lot?
Yeah, I think about it probably every race I get an opportunity to see it, because you said it perfectly. Like there's scenarios where I'll finish, I'll eat dinner, I'll go to bed, I can wake up and come back the next morning and there's still someone out there, groups of people out there in some cases. And I think that's like that's like the inspiration for me, I think, is as someone who hasn't figured out like the 24. So there's these 24-hour timed events, and I've done one of them in a real structured manner, and I've done a couple kind of on a whim, and all of them have gone terrible so far. So when I go out and I see, like, let's say it's a 100-mile race and I happen to finish like, before bedtime essentially, and, there's someone who's going to be finishing that next morning. When I see them finish, I'm not thinking, wow, they're really moving slow. I'm thinking they didn't sleep last night. They haven't had a real meal since probably the breakfast before the start of the race. They probably didn't sleep well the night before. They're probably not going to sleep well tonight, just with all the, goofy like soreness and hormone fluctuations and things that happen with, running 100 miles or running overnight and things that you shouldn't routinely be doing to your body. I think that's kind of like an inspiration thing to me too, because it's like they're doing what they can with what they have. And have available to them. And it doesn't mean that it's any easier. In fact, sometimes it might be even harder. And I think coaching has really shown this to me as well, where, for me, I've been able to build my life around training and racing, like the stuff I do that are non-specific or specific maybe to a degree, like podcasting, for example, or things that I plan, I schedule, I can choose if I want to do more or less of them. Most people, that I'm coaching are married, they have kids, they have a job, they have all sorts of other obligations. Maybe they volunteer. And it's like, we look at their availability to train and we're like, okay, we found these 10 hours that are sporadically spread across a 7-day period where you can go out and prepare for this event you're doing. It's just mind-boggling to me, I think, sometimes when the confidence that these folks have to be able to say, I still want to do that, even though I can only give 10 hours a week of training to this. And it's humbling to me to have them reach out to me and say, I think you can give me a program that fits within this 10-hour window that'll get me ready for this too. So I think when you kind of look at it whole picture, look at like the life experience and everything else included outside of just the act of finishing the race, doing the race, it paints a much more vivid picture of like kind of what the accomplishment actually is. And that's where I think it gets interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in many ways, it's actually much more impressive what those people you described are doing, getting up at 4 a.m. to squeeze in a run before kids wake up and then the day begins. And that's actually much more inspiring, especially without, any kind of tangibles or, the pat on the backs that you or I might get from a big, group of people. So yeah, that's why I wanted to celebrate those people, because quite often they feel they put us on the pedestal when they're the ones that are actually doing the amazing thing here with it. So yeah,
that's a really good point too. Cause like if take my race at the US championships, there's a 2-week wave after that where I'm getting kudos and likes and comments and congratulatory messages and things like that, that kind of cement in my mind that I had an accomplishment. Whereas, if you finish in the back of a pack, you might, you go to work the next day or the following Monday. And, I'm sure people are impressed with anyone running 100 miles in most cases, but there's not that big wave of congratulatory encouragement that kind of comes with it. I think anyone who's honest with themselves is going to be open to the fact that that's going to be a motivator to get out and do it again. Everyone likes to feel good, and there's no way around that. That's, feels good to have people tell you did a good job and pat you on the back.
Yeah, definitely. So just one more question to do with that 100-mile championships. You posted a few things about running in the heat. You said it feels like 94, which, that's impressive. As we are going into summer here, you said something about white arm sleeves cooling you down. Can you, explain about that? And then any other things you would tell people with regards to running in the heat and staying cool?
Yeah. So the arm sleeves, originally, my goal with those was there were something I could get wet that would stay wet. Whereas like in the dry heat, if I just dump water on my arm, it's dry in like seconds, basically, where you have that material holds onto that water. And then that's going to create a cooling effect, especially if there's any type of breeze and stuff like that. But there's also some other things at play. There's some of the technology with like the arm sleeves too. They offer like a cooling effect, and most people think of arm sleeves probably as a warming effect. So there's like technology that's going to do that as well. And I think most of it is driven from when you actually have the sun or the UV rays hit your direct skin. Hopefully I don't butcher this too much, but it's like basically what happens is your body has to cool that area. So you're pulling blood to that area to kind of get that cooling effect. Whereas when you remove the direct sunlight from hitting that skin, your body doesn't have to use that resources as expensively to do that. So then it can be reserved for other things like working your muscles, digesting foods, and cooling other areas and things like that. So the arm sleeves, I think, kind of have a dual purpose with that. You can get as fancy as sticking ice in them too, and keep like a little bit of a more cooling effect involved with it. But it's with that race in particular, it's kind of unique where we had it was like a 1.17 mile loop.
Yeah.
So every 8-ish minutes or so, I might feel terrible for Nicole, who had to sit out there every day and literally watch and help me every 85 times. It's one of those things where like it behooves you to get wet every time you can for the majority of those laps in the middle of the day. So like, going through, one thing I think I did really well at that particular race was, even if it took me a couple extra seconds, I was going to make sure I got myself wet before I left the aid station. So then, even though it felt like 95 outside, I was probably able to keep my core temperature lower through that. So that's something I've learned semi the hard way living here in the desert in Phoenix. I certainly probably had an advantage at that particular event because of that. I was basically just heading, a couple 100 miles north into another desert. So it wasn't really that big of a variance from what I've been exposed to. So I knew what to do. I had a plan and it worked really well. So that certainly helped from a competitive advantage to know those things.
Yeah, really interesting. And so related to that, if you're going to run, I'm assuming early morning before the sun comes up or late at night, then this doesn't relate to that. But does that mean if you're running during the day when the sun is up, it's going to be better for like a man to wear a shirt, a woman to wear a sports bra and a shirt or a tank, as opposed to just no shirt or just a sports bra because of the less skin exposed?
Yeah, from a performance standpoint, I think it's probably the way to go for the most part. I think you'll get an argument for like vitamin D exposure perhaps. And so sometimes what I'll do in the summer is I'll have like some really thin like performance tech t-shirt on that is going to be a type of material that actually kind of holds on to a little bit of the moisture. So then this would be different if I were in a humid climate, but when I sweat out here, I could run 3 hours in the heat out here in the middle of summer with just a pair of shorts on, a pair of shoes on, and not even realize I was sweating the entire time, but I'd probably lose like pounds of water. Mm-hmm. But you don't necessarily want that. You want that water or that wetness to cling to you because that's going to create cooling when the breeze hits it. So I'll do like a t-shirt that has like a material that holds on to a little bit of that sweat so that sweat doesn't just evaporate immediately. I'll put the arm sleeves on. Usually I'll cover up my face or like you wear a visor or something so I'm not getting just like complete sun exposure to the face. And then I might just take the shirt off and the sleeves off for like 15, 20 minutes somewhere in there just to kind of get some of the sun exposure from like a vitamin D standpoint. But
I love how you're thinking about vitamin D during handlebar races.
Yeah, I feel like it's something where growing up in the Midwest, we'd have the kind of overcast days and the cloudy days in the winter. So now that I'm out here in Phoenix, there's plenty of sun. So you definitely can be a little more picky or choosy, but I do think it's probably good to get some of it from, obviously there's, certain situations where that's probably ill-advised at any capacity if you've had like skin cancer or something like that. But yeah, I think a little bit of sun can go a long ways. But 3 hours of it, 4 hours of it, on direct skin is seemingly not a performance advantage. And it's probably not a good health advantage either if you're getting, lobster red burnt out there.
Yeah. You don't put sunscreen on, I take it, before you do these runs?
I do, but I'm kind of choosy about where I put it, partly just because I think that actually can have a negative advantage from a sweat standpoint. So I'll get like kind of strategic with it. Like I'll put it on like my nose and my ears and some spots that I think are going to just get like completely brutalized by the sun if they're not have some sort of cover, and also aren't going to be great vehicles for like moisture release. So I'll put some on my nose, like kind of underneath my eyes, on my ears, and like maybe depending on what I'm wearing, like on the back of my neck or something like that. But other than that, I'm not doing a ton of sunscreen.
Yeah, because that would definitely stop the sweat. So it's such a tough thing because you know what you should be doing.
Yeah.
You should be putting it all over, but then even the idea of sunscreen plus running is
it's like, how can I make this more miserable?
yeah, exactly. Okay, so just take a minute to tell people about your podcast. Where can they go find it? Who, there's so many podcasts out there. Who are you speaking to here? Who would enjoy it?
Yeah, so the podcast is called Human Performance Outliers Podcast. It's on all podcast platforms and YouTube under that name. I've got a lot of details about it on my website at zachbitter.com/HPO if you want to go directly to that part of the website. In terms of, listeners, we definitely dive into a lot of kind of topics around performance, nutrition. I'm super curious in low carbohydrate, so I do bring on quite a few folks who are going to either like tell me I'm doing something wrong or tell me I'm doing something right or something in between around that topic. So there's not a shortage of that. I like to talk to folks about particular things I'm currently interested in. So things do kind of evolve a bit. Like right now, I'm planning a project to run across the country this fall. So I've been bringing on some folks who do these like long haul, multi-day type projects where they got to kind of run all day and get up and do it again the next day and over again. I've gotten interested in things like regenerative agriculture in the past and had on guys like Alan Savory and Joel Salatin, who are kind of big figureheads in that kind of vertical farming, regenerative agriculture world.
Yes.
So yeah, it's like a really, I'm definitely an endurance geek, so it skews that direction. But if I get interested in something, I don't care if it's completely irrelevant to endurance, I'll have them on there. And, so sometimes I'll have like strength athletes on and things like that. If I get interested in just like, strength and conditioning type things and maybe how that translates into endurance and stuff like that too. So, it's been a lot of fun to do it, but if any of that sounds interesting, they can check it out. And if they think I'm interested in something I'm unaware of, definitely send me a note. I'd be happy to geek out on something new.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then you can also, they can also find links to your social media on your website, as well as you're just Zach Bitter, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's easy to remember. If you want to go check him out. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you and all that you do for the community and just to inspire us all. So yeah, thanks for joining me.
Awesome. Well, thanks a bunch for having me on, Tina. It was a blast.
Before we end this episode, I just want to take a moment to shout out my podcast editor, Jeremy Nessel, who has done such a wonderful job of looking after my podcast, taking out all the mishaps in the episodes, while still keeping in the vulnerability and the realness and the rawness of the conversation. This is not one of those podcasts where I take out the ums and the ers and the sometimes the delay in words, because I think it's very important to keep that authenticity. We're surrounded by perfected and manicured everything, and I think it's really important that Running for Real stays that way. So thank you to Jeremy for your work. I also want to thank Maria Vargas and Amber Moore, who are also part of my team. They've been a big part of this community and me being able to build this brand. So just want to give them a shout out too. All right, let's get right back to the end of this episode. Thank you to Zach for joining me today on the Running for Real podcast. I really enjoyed getting to know him more and asking him some different questions. He's been on so many shows, and it was nice to do something a bit different. You can be sure to go check out his podcast. There are links in the show notes at runningforreal.com/episode 252. You can also get links to our sponsors in there, which are Momentous. You can get 20% off at livemomentous.com. Athletic Greens, you can get that 1 year free supply of vitamin D with your order. And Gooder, you can get those $25 pair of sunglasses by going to gooder.com/Tina. And also, I did mention I have put a link in there to get you 15% off your order at Ultra if you want to try out a pair of the shoes. And in the show notes, I will be sure to note some of Zach's favorites, so you can go get yourself a pair of those if you are a male and have been hearing me talk about my favorites, but you are a different gender to me. Thank you so much for listening, my friends. I will see you on Monday for another Together Run, and then on next Friday for another episode. Thanks for joining me.